Tornado, a special report.
Good evening, I'm Buck Matthews. 64 years ago, in his delightful fairy tale, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, L. Frank Baum wrote of how Dorothy and Toto were miraculously transported from the dry, gray Kansas prairie to a country of marvelous beauty. The vehicle he imagined for this journey was what was then called a cyclone. For having written his book so early in the history of weather forecasting, Baum's rather sketchy descriptions of the storm, a low wail of the wind, a sharp whistling in the air, a great shriek from the wind howled horribly, were remarkably accurate. But in those days, about the best one could do in the way of advance notice of a great storm such as that one was to be related to someone like Dorothy's Uncle Henry, who could read the signs in the rippling grass and the whistling wind and announce, "There's a cyclone coming, Em." We've come a long way since then, and in this program, we'll attempt to show just how far we've advanced in our battle with what we now call the tornado. The word tornado is derived by devious roots from a Latin word for thunder, the storm itself having been nicknamed the Big Thunder by some of the Spanish-speaking peoples. The name is, of course, a galloping example of understatement, because those who know by experience compare the bellow of a tornado to the sound of 1,000 jet planes passing overhead at low altitude. It's a violent, twisting, funnel-shaped local windstorm that is the most powerful and destructive force in all of nature. In the days of Oz, it came without warning. But those days, thanks to continuing scientific research, are gone. Except in rare and unusual cases, such storms can now be foreseen as much as 10 hours in advance, with the public advised to take the necessary precautions for preserving life and property. Tornadoes are spawned usually on warm, humid days with brisk south winds. Thunderstorms with hail are common. Great dark masses of cumulonimbus clouds, restless and turbulent, bulging down and changing shape rapidly. Sometimes the clouds will be a thickish green-gray or black. Witnesses say there's an awesome beauty to it all, until there suddenly appears from the bottom of the cloud a quick twisting of the winds in a tight circle that extends itself in a narrow column toward the earth. The tornado is born. An erratic, unbelievably powerful wind that has never been clocked. Every wind-measuring instrument ever devised has been destroyed by the very wind it was required to measure, the strongest winds in the atmosphere. They are estimated to be in excess of 500 miles per hour. The average middle-class pipe and slippers run-of-the-mill tornado lives a short life, about 30 minutes, stays on the ground for a distance of 15 or 16 miles, traveling 25 to 40 miles per hour in a northeasterly direction, doing its work on any particular spot in about 30 seconds. It's an eccentric piece of business, dipping and lifting and twisting about as if unsure of where it had been or where it would go. The storm has three destructive effects. Of course, the wind alone can simply blow down buildings and trees and anything else in its path. But there are two peculiarities that the tornado shares with no other storm. One is the explosive force it creates by the immediate collapse of air pressure at its base. Almost any building whose doors and windows are closed and over which the vortex passes will explode like a bomb because of the comparatively high air pressure inside the building. And in addition, there is a tremendous lifting force within the funnel caused by the updraft of the wind. Tornadoes come in all sizes and shapes, varying from long, thin, rope-like storms to large columns. Oddly enough, these terrible storms are related in a distant way to the dust under your bed. Tornadoes are eddies of air, just as are hurricanes, cyclonic storms, waterspouts, and dust devils, all of which are classified as moving eddies. There exist also what are known as standing eddies, even under the furniture in your house. Miniature eddies of air form around the legs and the edges of your bed, for instance, picking up dust and shutting it back into the quiet air beneath the springs, where it collects and forms kitties of lint. Tornadoes have occurred in many parts of the world, including the area west of the Ural Mountains of Russia and in Australia. More than 80% of all tornadoes, however, are formed in the central part of the United States. Every state within the continental limits has experienced at least one tornado, and they are considered moderately frequent in the Great Lakes Ohio River area. In topographical terms, they are most unusual over mountains, though, of course, as you see here, they do happen, and they are most common in the plains. About 200 tornadoes occur every year in the United States, more than half of them in the months of April, May, and June. They can appear at any hour, but they are more likely to form in the hours following the warmest part of the day, 3 to 7 p.m. being the period in which most of them hit. There was a time when people assumed that tornadoes simply appeared out of nowhere for no apparent reason. Weather Bureau research and the development of accurate instruments have combined to bring us to the point where meteorologists can now actually forecast the possibility of tornadoes in specific areas and do this with acceptable accuracy. The responsibility for this is borne by the men of the Severe Local Storm Forecast Center at Kansas City, Missouri. There, statistical information on local weather conditions from every Weather Bureau reporting station in the country is constantly received and analyzed. Charts and graphs and symbols and language that would stupefy ordinary people like us are devoured by them like the Sunday paper. More often than not, that jumble of information projects no unusual or alarming potentials. But now and then there grows out of the babble the unmistakable clue that galvanizes the center into action. A typical severe weather forecast evolves like this at the Kansas City Center. This simplified surface chart of the United States represents major weather systems at 6:30 a.m. Now, this alone might not tip them off, but comparison of this chart with others tells them that this day could be a touchy one. The ingredients are there. In simplest terms, the typical tornado is a child of contrasting weather conditions that simply do not belong together. Warm, moist air pushes up from the Gulf, as you can see here. Higher in the atmosphere, cold air pushes toward it from the west. Now, the cold air sinks, and the warm air rises, and the turmoil produced by this encounter upsets the balance enough to warn the forecaster that somewhere east of this system, an area of the middle United States is in for it. Now, calculating carefully, he determines where there is the greatest likelihood of severe weather development and tornado formation. The center then immediately issues a tornado forecast, which is transmitted directly to the Weather Bureau station serving that area. The station disseminates the information to police and fire agencies and other emergency organizations and to all broadcasting stations. It is then our duty to pass this information on to you exactly as we receive it from the Weather Bureau. Now remember, this first information is a tornado forecast, which means that conditions may become favorable for development of tornadoes over a specified area within a specified time period. In this case, the center decides on an area including much of eastern Kansas, southeast Nebraska, southwestern Iowa, northeast Oklahoma, which is out of the picture here, and a sliver of western Missouri. And this chart shows how accurate that forecast proved. In all, 40 funnels were sighted and verified during the forecast period. And only 6 were outside the area pinpointed by the severe weather specialist at Kansas City. Now, although a tornado usually is distinct enough that an observer has little trouble in identifying it as one, conditions sometimes exist that contribute to confusion. Tornadoes are generally spawned by squall lines or severe thunderstorms, but it's possible for those conditions to exist without forming tornadoes. Sometimes natural cloud formations associated with bad weather cause undue alarm. This, for instance, is nothing but rain falling out of a rain cloud and evaporating in dry air before it hits the ground. You've probably seen this more than once. And the real clue here is that there is no rapid twisting motion around the formation. The technical name for this phenomenon is verja. This is probably as common a sight as you'll see on a showery day. A distant rain shower, which sometimes appears more dark and sinister than it really is. Again, soft vertical rain lines in the rain column should tip you off that this is not a twister. Sometimes an approaching squall line will lead with what is best described as a roll-type cloud. It often actually has a slow horizontal roll as it moves forward, but it can be distinguished from a tornado by its great length and the lack of vertical affection for the ground. Squall lines also sometimes take the shape of a long, flat shelf with a sort of untidy base. Sometimes it appears, when viewed from the side, to have isolated points of cloud, but the absence of the familiar whipping, twisting motion should clear it of suspicion. From underneath, a squall looks a bit like a cloud designed by committee, ragged and wind-torn with winds blowing in all directions at once. If a tornado should form within this line, the observer would see a definite, sustained rotation of wind around a central point, developing into a sort of donut, which would then build downward until it hit the ground. Now, these are mammatus cloud formations, which are usually nearly uniform in size and shape. They appear and level off gradually, and they do not have the familiar spinning motion. Now, here's the difference. A small pouch forms at the base of the dark cumulonimbus storm cloud above. The winds whirl about the vortex and touch the ground, picking up the dirt and loose objects that give the funnel its ominous color. And when it is a tornado, you know it's a tornado. Well, what do you do when you see a funnel cloud? The Weather Bureau suggests you first call them to be sure they know of its presence. Chances are excellent they do. During the period of tornado forecast, they never take their eyes off the sky or the radar scope. But twisters appear and disappear rather quickly, and the Bureau needs help in nailing them down. In southwestern Michigan, just pick up your phone and ask the operator to get you the Grand Rapids Weather Bureau Emergency Collect. If you can't get through, it means several other people are already reporting it, so hang up and go to a safe place. The best spots are under something substantial in the southwest corner of your basement. Now, stay away from windows. That's no time to do any sightseeing anyway. If you're in a masonry building, brick for example, you'd be better off leaving the building and seeking shelter elsewhere. The simple, sound reason for this is that while a frame building will sometimes be blown away entirely, a brick building will more likely collapse into the basement, and trying to claw your way out from under a pile of bricks is no picnic. Once the Weather Bureau learns of a touchdown, it immediately verifies its location by radar and notifies law enforcement agencies, civil defense authorities, and all broadcasting stations. Such notice arrives in my office by direct teletype from the Weather Bureau. And would radio and television interrupt whatever programs are on the air to notify you of what's happening and where? During the course of such emergencies, your television set or radio is your best friend because it's the source of immediate information. Remember, one of the best and most important emergency supplies you should have is a portable, battery-operated radio you can take with you and use if the power lines go down. Almost any way you cut it, a tornado is a potential tragedy. It may destroy your house or happen 1,000 miles away. But somewhere, a tornado is ruining something or someone. It admittedly is nothing to joke about. But no tornado has ever occurred that did not leave behind some freak result that bordered on the comic, as if the storm had, with wry humor, left its mark imprinted on its handiwork. Amidst the terrible destruction of entire communities, tornadoes have been known to remove the blankets and the mattress from a bed without injuring the people sleeping in the bed. Once an entire house was blown away without disturbing a small bench standing against an outside wall. A baby was lifted from its crib and deposited unharmed on the ground several feet away. The great tri-state tornado of 1925 carried a large piece of farm machinery, a binder, a quarter mile. It took a pair of trousers 39 miles, and a lady's compact was found 40 miles away. A crate of eggs was reported carried the length of 5 football fields and dumped without so much as a cracked egg. And the most common occurrence is for fowl to be left alive without a single feather remaining. The story I have the hardest time believing, though, is the one about straws being driven through steel girders, but they say it's true. I myself saw a couple of examples of this sort of foolishness in the Flint tornado of 1953. I took this picture of some sort of spade driven into this tree up to the haft. And these 2 sticks were driven into this door without even cracking the glass. American history is full of references to great weather disasters. Some of the worst of them have been Gulf and Atlantic coastal hurricanes. No natural phenomenon has inspired more legends or earned a greater place in infamy than the North American tornado. This sketch from Buck Barry's Indian collection was made near Alton, Illinois in the late 1600s by a missionary traveler. The Indians of Illinois and Lake Michigan called this terrible creature the piazza. It is described as part bird, part beast, with red eyes, the face of a man, antlers of a deer, a tiger's beard, wings of a bird, a body covered with scales, and a tail long enough to encircle its body. The Indians claimed the monster swooped down on them from above and killed great numbers of people, though they rarely saw it because of the dust it was supposed to have stirred up. And this is one of the earliest references to tornadoes in this country, for the piazza must surely have been a tornado, and it's no wonder the Indians had great respect for its power. In researching the subject for this program, I have run across 13 particularly terrible storms in the last 100 years, some of which are hard to imagine. February 19, 1884 was a day that has never been equaled for pure meteorological hell. On that day, a series of twisters chewed through parts of Mississippi, Tennessee, Kentucky, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, West Virginia, Alabama, Georgia, and the Carolinas. It's estimated there were more than 60 separate tornadoes. And when it was over, 800 were dead, 2,500 injured, and 10,000 buildings had been destroyed. The apparent granddaddy of them all is the one history chooses to call the Great Tri-State Tornado of March 18, 1925. That one funnel struck several towns in Missouri, Illinois, and Indiana, killed 792, injured 2,000, and did $18 million worth of property damage. Nothing before or since has equaled those 2 disasters. However, 10 years ago, 3 separate tornadoes in Waco, Texas, Flint, Michigan, and Worcester, Massachusetts, killed a total of 320 people. And on April 3rd, 1956, an unconfirmed funnel sighting came in from just south of Holland, Michigan. Minutes later, a tornado was verified in the Standale area at 6:55 p.m., traveling northeastward. It dissipated 32 minutes later, 2 miles north of Rockford, having traveled 25 miles, killed 17 persons, injured 300 more, and caused $10 million in property damage. This film was taken by Ernie Zedley of Grand Rapids from the roof of his home. And the voice of the storm was recorded by Wood audio engineer Paul Muskowitz. Probably the best documented tornado in history struck Dallas, Texas on April 2nd, 1957. It killed only 11, partly because by then the systems were in motion to warn the public and get them to safety. And because of advance notice, quick-thinking, well-prepared television newsmen were ready to film them. One of the most interesting things about this film taken in Dallas in 1957 is that as you watch the funnel cross the city, you'll notice that it occasionally changes color. Incidentally, here it looks as if it's about to develop a second funnel. It does not. You'll notice as the funnel walks its way across the city, it occasionally changes color, growing lighter or darker. And this does not depend on the color of the cloud above it, which has formed the tornado, but rather on what material the storm is picking up as it crosses the ground. For instance, a tornado that crosses water, which is called a water spout, has an almost whitish color because of the moisture that it picks up from the water. This is unquestionably the best tornado film ever made anyplace. And it was made by the newsmen on the staff of television station WFAA in Dallas. This tornado appeared out of the sky just about the time people were on their way home from work. That's why there appears to be so much traffic on the streets. These people were, of course, trying to get home to their families. Notice the electric wires going down. All of this considered, the causes, the effects, the awesome, overwhelming power of this great storm, the means for forecasting its development, tracking its progress, warning of its approach. What are your chances of being in the path of a tornado this year? Well, the Geometeorological Center of Tornado Activity is eastern Kansas. More of these storms have occurred in that area and the adjacent areas of Nebraska, Iowa, Missouri, and Oklahoma than in any other spot in the world. In Tornado Alley, as it's sometimes called, based on statistical records, chances are even that in any year a tornado will strike within 4 miles of any person living in that area. Yet, even there, chances are more than 1,000 to 1 that a person and his property will not be struck by a tornado. In southwestern Michigan, you are 8 to 10 times safer than that. They have happened here, and they could happen again. But we've learned a lot in 7 years, and the important thing is to take advantage of what we know. The early forecast facility of the Weather Bureau, the watchful eyes of radar, the rapid communication of information through police agencies and volunteer organizations, immediate dissemination of hard facts to you from this and all other stations, all of this combines to make you even safer. But you have a responsibility to yourself that we cannot assume for you. You must prepare for what could happen by learning the rules and following them. Toward this end, Wood, in cooperation with the Department of Commerce Weather Bureau, has prepared a sheet of information on tornadoes. You can get your copy free simply by writing Tornado, Wood Television, Grand Rapids. We'll include an extra copy for you to carry in your car. Remember, tornadoes, like wars and automobile accidents, are hardest on the unprepared.
We'd like to express our thanks to those who contributed to this program.
Remember, tornadoes, like wars and automobile accidents, are hardest on the unprepared.